Hello again, everybody. This is Ian, also known as Kale, and I am here to talk about some data entry stuff. So this video will differ from the last ones in that I'm not really going to get into rule elements. If you want more videos on rule elements, please do donate to this year's Extra Life. I'll have a link to our team page down in the description. If we reach high enough goals as a team, then I will be making even more rule element videos in the coming year. For right now, though, this is the third of 4 videos that I promised last year, and the fourth one will be coming out hopefully fairly soon after this, but I'm still working out details. This video is going to be over data entry, basically how to do data entry and sort of some of the tools that we use, and sort of go over some of the formatting things that we do here in Foundry for the system, and then sort of how to make your material, if you're making your homebrew material, how to make it stand out a little bit better than just text on an item. All right, so let's start by just exploring some of the different items. Right, so let's start off by creating a feat. Okay. And this is just a test feat. So the first thing we can see here is that, right, there's a category. We can make this any of these things we want, right? If we make this a class feat, right, we can set the rarity of it, we can set the level, and we can set the icon. Now, every feat in the system uses a default Foundry icon. And so that's going to be under the Foundry icons, under sundries and books, and then it's this book here with red exclamation mark. Right, so we as a system just decided very early on that this is going to be the icon we use for all feats. It didn't have to be that way. For Starfinder, for example, we use a different icon that's included in the Starfinder module that looks more like a data pad. All right, and then we can add traits to this, right? So if this is a fighter feat, we add the fighter trait, right? Arcane, acid, right? We can just add any of these feats. We can either pick them out of the list. As you can see, there's a lot of traits that we can add to feats, or we can type them in and select them that way. We can edit the description, just type in whatever we want. If we hit this button, we come into HTML mode. And so that means that if we want to I can type, I promise I can. Right, so if we type something like this and then save it, right, we get one of them bolded and one of them not because I added strong tags. Right, and so this will be useful for us to have while we can do our formatting in this. If you already have the text in another document, let's say a PDF, then it's going to be much more convenient to insert things through HTML because we have some tools to do that for us. Right. And then when we come to the details tab, we have all of our different item details, right? So we have action, reaction, reaction, and passive as our action types. And once you choose action, you can select 1, 2, or 3 actions. We don't have anything right now for variable action feats. So for the system, we always use the minimum number of actions something can take. Right, so if you have something like, I believe, Doctor's Visitation. Right, so you can spend 2 actions for Doctor's Visitation to do a different thing. We have it entered as a single action, right, because that's the minimum number it's going to take. So it's more convenient for players to look and see, oh, this is 1 action, what can it do? Gotcha, and then they can read and see, oh, if I spend 2 actions, I can do something else. Some point we will have 1, 2, or 1 through 3 action symbols there as well, but right now we don't. Okay, so right, you can set a feat whether you can take it up to a certain number of times. You can set a feat so that it's only required, you must be at level 1 to take it, and that's usually for something like a lineage feat. You can set your prerequisites, you can set in your sub-features, right? Adding languages is pretty straightforward, adding proficiencies, pretty straightforward. The one thing I will say is that if you have a homebrew class and you are trying to add a class DC, you can't do it this way. Your class will define its own DC on the class item, and then you will need to use active effect like rule elements to increase the class DC, because it won't be registered in that list. So senses is one thing that I want to show off here, and so we're going to add, our test feat is going to add dark vision, and it's going to add motion sense. So we can show off the two different sort of feature sets here. So in dark vision, you'll notice that I can't change these, precise and no limit. So that's because the rules of Pathfinder 2e themselves set that vision is a precise sense and that there is no limit other than what the GM determines you can see at any given time. So we don't implement anything to limit vision, but you might notice these three buttons to the right of the dark vision label. This A is only grant dark vision if the character's ancestry has low light vision. Right, so this is saying that if you are playing an ancestry with low light vision, you should get dark vision. And there's a handful of things that do that. Typically, versatile heritages are the things that have that kind of language, where it'll say if you already have low light vision from your ancestry, you gain dark vision. But it doesn't say that if you would gain low light vision if you had or dark vision if you had low light vision from a feat, for example. Then this, right, grant if you have low light vision from any prior source. So this is even if you got it from a feat or whatever, you get it. You get dark vision from this. This one is grant if the feat is taken a second time, right? So only grant dark vision if you take the feat a second time. Otherwise, in all likelihood, it grants low light vision for the first time. And that. There's a few feats out there like that where you take it and it has a special line that says special if you take this a second time, you gain dark vision. Right, that should be hopefully fairly straightforward what it means. For motion sense here, right, most of these other senses aren't precise senses by definition, so we can set the acuity of the feat, or of the sense, and then we can set the limits. This is 30 feet. Self-applied effect, so this means that on the actor, right, so let's say this feat, you use it and it casts Bless on you, right? You could set Bless to be the self-applied effect. And then when this feat is on the actor, when they use it, they'll get the box in the chat that will ask them if they want to apply the effect. Right, so that's what this self-applied effect field does. Other tags, this lets you tag certain feats. So let's say you had a set of feats that you wanted to pick from. Usually this shows up with a choice set, but it's also something that has been used with some other rule element automation. So these tags let you sort of set things. So if you're making instead of a new feat, if you were making a new class feature, like you're making a new witch patron, you would just tag it with witch patron. Right, and you can look and see right, so here in the resentment witch patron, it has witch patron as its tag, right? And so this lets you easily look up what are all the witch patrons in a choice set rule element. So that's a really nice new feature. And then you have the publication. If your item is older, in all likelihood, it's going to be OGL. The remaster is separate from OGL because there are some remastered OGL items, mostly from Rage of Elements. But you set your publication title, you can set your license to be either OGL or Orc, and you can set the item to be remaster or not. Right? And then the authors field, we don't use this in the system itself, but if you want to, give credit to the author, if you wrote it, or if you are, using a source that has the author listed for each individual item, you can list it here, right? And then the rules tab, I've covered that in other videos, but this is where you would add stuff. So that is the basics of a feat item. Most other items are pretty similar, right? If you look at, say, an ability, right? It's very similar to a feat. It just has, it doesn't give you the option to add the quick, languages, proficiencies, or senses here. But all this stuff is still pretty similar. Death Note means that this gets posted to chat when the creature hits 0 hit points, right? And it also marks the ability on an NPC with a little skull. This category here, right? So this tells you what category of action it is. This is kind of strange if you aren't aware of our way of thinking about categories. So if you look at a creature, so let's say the Iron Hag from Monster Core, this top section here is what we in Foundry call the interaction section. I don't know if Paizo has a different name for these sections. This middle section we call the defensive section, and down here everything from the speed and below is the offensive section. It does not matter whether the ability is reads like it's offensive or defensive, right? If I move to change shape up here, then it becomes a defensive ability on that creature. For hazards, we just say everything is offensive, and for PC abilities, just everything is offensive. That's fine, right? So these are mostly for if we ever do a Paizo style NPC sheet rewrite, or if somebody wanted to make a module that created an NPC sheet that formats it a lot more like Paizo does, it would automatically sort the abilities into the different areas of the sheet properly, right? For the most part, Paizo sticks reactions here in defensive, whether they are a reaction that lets you attack or not. They tend to go in defensive, whereas anything that actually costs actions proper tends to be in offensive, and then passives tend to either be offensive or deep. Passives can be kind of all over the place, but typically you see most things down here in offensive, right? So that's the ability item, right? You could also call this the action item because this lets you create actions. And then the other big things, right? We have ancestries, backgrounds, classes. All of these just have a field that you can, right? That you can actually, this is all just a form that you can fill out, and it's pretty easy to fill out. Most of the stuff is pretty straightforward. The spell item, right, has a lot of different fields to it, and it might not be immediately obvious how to set certain things. So let's say I am, I'm working on a ritual. You have to come down here and check ritual, and then it will change this form over to the ritual form. Right? If it has counteract, you just check this counteract button, and that'll be for things like dispel magic. So if you want it to be a focus spell, right, you would just add the focus trait. If you wanted it to be a cantrip, just add the cantrip trait, and it swaps this out. And so, right, for the most part, adding traits, filling out these forms, right, it's pretty easy. Right, if I put in 1, 2, or 3 here, I get those. If I put in reaction R, if I put in a reaction, then I get the reaction symbol. Right, so all this stuff is pretty basic, pretty much just filling in the form, setting up the amount of damage. The two types of heightening, right, so there's interval heightening and there's fixed heightening. Interval heightening is when you have, heightened +1, right? Fixed heightening is when you have, at 6th level, this does something different. And with fixed heightening, you can actually enter in the different changes that happen. So at 6th level, it might say, it now targets, up to 5 creatures or whatever. So that's the basics of heightening. The spell variants lets you create multiple variants of a spell, right? And so I could say, let's say this spell, one action, And then this spell has 3 variants. It's got a 1 action, 2 action, 3 action variant. Right, and the 1 action variant's already set up. 2 actions come into your details. I set 2, and I can change the damage or whatever I need to for the 2 action variant. Then the 3 action variant, right, same thing. Come in here, set 3 actions, and then I have 3 variants of the spell, and when I cast it, I will be able to pick which variant I cast. Right, and the most notable example of that is the heal spell. Right, so we've got heal, heal versus living, heal versus undead, and just 3 action heal. Right, and this is because the living version of the 2 action spell gets a bonus to healing, and the when you cast it versus undead, it just does d8 damage with the increased range. So yeah, so this is how spell variants work. For the most part, what you want to do is you want to set up the base of the spell first before you come in and set up variants, because you want everything to be set up properly the first time. Okay, so that's how all the different item types work. For the most part, it's just filling in things and then adding a description. Now let's talk about the system style guide, the guide we have on our wiki that tells us how things in the system should look, and for the most part that is matching Paizo's style. But the first part of the style guide is actually a sort of guide to how inline automation works. If we pull up our style guide, right, so we have all of these general principles, links to the data entry script, and then we talk about inline automation, right, and it covers how to do these inline roles like we do for counteract checks. We don't have something special for that, so we're just using the regular Foundry inline roles to create buttons. And so these things are, that's cross-system compatible. The PF2e system itself does have a few special functions. So the first one that we're going to look at here is @damage. This is just how damage is formatted in the system. Okay, and so you can see here, right, @damage, capital D, where we then attach these dice expressions to a damage type, and we can add a label if we want. In the system, we don't typically add labels to things. Right, so we can type in @damage, and we can do 1d6 acid, and we save that, we get this. And the nice thing about @damage is that it can resolve things. So let's say this does 1d6 damage per actor level, right? And so you might be wondering, well, how does it know what actor level it's on? This is just a feat in the sidebar. By default, it uses the item level if it's not on an actor. So if I change the item level, it's equivalent to changing the actor level. Once this is on an actor, it will pull from the actual actor's level. But this way you can see the actual changes you make, right? If I change this, it changes the damage. So I can also add additional damage, and these are all comma separated, right? So let's say I do 1d6 acid and 5 fire. Okay, and so I save that, and we get this. Okay, typically in the system, we copy Paizo's actual wording, and so this would normally say 1d6 acid damage per level and 5 fire. Right, so that's the kind of wording that you would normally see, and so we want to keep Paizo's wording as much as possible. Right, the problem is that we don't get the updating labels with this, but we prefer to keep Paizo's wording when possible. So we avoid editorializing on things when we can, but it's also fine if you're just doing an inline damage to just do this as well. And there's some things that might benefit from condensing a little bit because the label would be really long. There's, some Dragonstorm enemies that do, 1d6 damage of a few different damage types, and that label can get quite long unless we truncate it. So the next thing we want to look at here, so let's say this thing does, 1d6 acid plus 1d6 fire plus 5 fire, right? If I save this, I get this strange thing, right? If I roll it, I get this untyped damage. So what went wrong? Well, think about this like you would think about math. This fire here is being distributed to the 5, and then I have 1d6 untyped plus 5 fire, and that doesn't make any sense to the system. So I need to add some parentheses telling the system, hey, distribute this fire to all of these terms in here. And now I get the properly typed damage. So hopefully that makes sense if you think about each of these dice expressions as a separate mathematical formula, and you just need to distribute the label to all of them. You can also make that damage persistent, right, by just adding persistent into here. Something to be aware of is that there's, so let's say this is area damage. You want to add new options, right? And so that you're going to use a vertical pipe here, and then options, and we're going to have the option area damage. Okay, and so that is important because now if I inspect this roll, I can see area damage. That will trigger certain weaknesses, like a swarm or troops weakness to area damage. So we can include additional options in here. We could include things like materials, so we could make this silver or adamantium, adamantine, whatever Paizo calls it. So we can, assign special materials to this damage. We can assign new roll options, and we can also assign traits proper. Instead of doing that in options, we can add a new section and call it traits, right? And so if this particular damage has the death trait, then we can add that, and it will add the actual trait to the roll. So even if the item itself doesn't, right, we can add that in here. So that's how at damage works, right? You can see all that stuff in here. At damage is nice because it does pick up on elite and weak. So if you have an item on an NPC and you hit the elite button, it will automatically increase the damage by 2. If you have a frequency set on that action, it will increase the damage by 4. Same thing with weak. It will drop the damage by 2 or 4, depending. And you can see here we have notes on how to add precision damage, how to add splash is the same. It needs to be separated from the damage pool. So the next thing we want to look at is inline checks, right? So this is, a basic fortitude save, DC 20. And this is constructed very similar to at damage, right? It's just at check, type of save, the DC, and then basic being in the data set tells it whether we have whether to add the basic label or not. And so let's look at how that works. And so first we're going to paste this in, okay, and I'm going to save it, and that might look a little strange, right? If you're used to how the system normally formats this, you might notice that there's some weird fonts in here. And if we actually come in to edit the HTML, and we see the problem. Okay, so when you paste into the Foundry editor, it's going to accept the formatting from the source that you pasted from. And we can either come into HTML and just take all of this stuff in the span and get rid of it, get rid of the closing span, right? And now we have a normal basic fortitude save. Or, right, so there's our junky one. If I Control-Shift-V instead, I get a regular thing, because Control-Shift-V pastes without formatting. So it's a very common mistake to make where you copy and paste something because we've given it to you in Discord, and you paste it in and it doesn't work. And the reason is because some of this formatting will actually end up breaking these @checks. Because if it inserts the formatting into the actual check here, if this span gets put in here, then this breaks entirely. And so people will, if the formatting is wrong from the source, or, the source is just applying a weird, set of rules to how the font works, if any of that is inside the @check, then the way that we try to figure out, how to build the HTML for this doesn't work. And so the @check doesn't render. And so be aware of that when you are copying and pasting. It helps to either paste directly into HTML mode, or it helps to Control-Shift-V when you're pasting into the regular input. So let's talk about the different parts of @check. So here we have a fortitude save. We're setting the DC and we're saying that it's basic. When we say that something is basic, right, we get this basic label, and it automatically includes the damaging effect roll option, because all basic saves by definition are damaging effects. And that matters for things like Bulwark, where you get a bonus to your reflex saves versus damaging effects from your armor, from your heavy armor. So a lot of the time, what we want isn't a static DC, we want a DC that is based off of something. And there's a few ways that we can go about that. The way that we have used for a long time is resolve, where we pass a resolve function to the DC, and DC is the only thing that accepts resolve as an input. But when we pass resolve, we then pass it a bit of data, right? And so here we have actor level, so the DC would be the actor level, right? A very low DC. And this doesn't have a DC on it because @check doesn't use the item level as the actor level like @damage does. But this has actually been largely subsumed. We don't really use resolve in the system anymore, and that's because we have a new bit of magic, which is against. And so we can just tell it what statistic to actually roll against, right? So let's say this is an ability that is on a fighter feat. We can against fighter, and this would now roll against the fighter class DC, right? So if I put this on a fighter, it will show a DC whatever. If I put this on a sorcerer, it will show 0 because the sorcerer is still untrained in fighter class DC. And so, right, we can also do, if you want the higher of, the most common one is the higher of the class or spell DC, and that is class-spell. Okay, and so that gives us a box that will take the higher of your class DC or your highest spell DC. And that's pretty common in some like ancestry feats and things like that, or archetype feats that use your class or spell DC that could be taken by either casters or marshals. The other thing that we want to know about how against works, right? So we can specify anything we want, right? So we could say that this is a perception check against deception, right? So this would be a check against the deception DC, but you'll notice that I don't have a DC anymore. It doesn't even say DC 0. So why is that? Well, it's because when you're making a skill check against something, we assume that so most of those abilities are made so that they are, it's an ability that will be phrased like, make a perception check against the target's deception DC, right? And so that's for something like, sense motive. What we can do if we want to specify what DC to pull is we can add roller roll, okay? And so this is telling us who's the person who's going to be rolling the actual check, right? If we say that the roller roll is the origin, that means the person who owns the item the check is on makes the roll. That's the default for perception and skills, because typically those abilities you roll against somebody else's DC, right? For things like, tripping. But if instead the target is the one that is rolling, if your ability says they have to make a perception check against your deception DC, then we can set the target as the roller roll, and we get our DC back, because this is now going to try to pull from the deception DC of the actor the item is on. So hopefully that makes sense. That's kind of a weird thing. For saves, those typically get flipped, right? So generally, for a save, right, if I say reflex and I remove roller roll, it shows the DC, because for a save, typically when you have a saving throw on an ability, the DC should be pulling from the origin actor. You can add roller roll in, and it defaults to target for a save. But if you say that, hey, the origin is actually the one rolling this save, and it's against the, in this case, the reflex against the target's deception DC, strange ability, but, so now it no longer shows the DC, because we wouldn't want to leak that information to the player who owns the item, right? You don't want them to be able to just target a creature and then it pops up saying, hey, this is, DC 17 save, so you know immediately what their deception is. So that's how @check works. There's a lot of other things here. Just like @damage, we have the ability to add additional options, right? And so we can add in additional options. So if this isn't a basic save, but it still does damage, right, we can add in damaging effect, right? We can also add in traits proper, right, if this is an incapacitation effect, right? So now if I make this save, right, if I make a new actor, drop them down here, and make this save, I can see that damaging effect and incapacitation are in the roll options. And so this would give us, this would give us all the automation that we need, right? It properly adds item trait incapacitation to the roll as well, right? Not just top level incapacitation. And so that's the difference between an option and a trait. Options are not, options should be for things that aren't traits proper. Traits proper should be added in this, because they'll get added to item traits, that subdomain, whereas damaging effect isn't an actual trait. It's just a roll option, right? It's a bit of the context around that roll. Right, and so that is, you can look at inline checks. We have a lot of other stuff in here, right? You can make multi-checks. The system itself does not use multi-checks, but you can see how they work. You can just comma separate different buttons, and when you set a DC, you can then also create an adjustment argument, and that adjustment can also be comma separated. And so if I come in here, Control-Shift-V to paste without formatting, I get two buttons, one at DC 20, one at DC 18, because I said don't adjust the first one and -2 to the second one. And so it creates those stacked things. And so that's good for homebrew if you're, wanting to create, a challenge in a journal or something like that and create a bunch of buttons really quick. This works great for it. Like I said, the system doesn't really use this. We would prefer to have everything just be formatted properly, as individual buttons. Most of the time where you get multiple buttons coming up after each other in hazards in dismantle or disable DCs, and those should be in line with the actual text. So, right, we can see here, right, there's a lot of different things, a lot of different arguments. Immutable is one that is kind of hard for some people to sort of grok at first, and this is telling it whether it should be affected by changes to the actor stats. This is automatically true for any flat checks. So flat checks already are immutable. Otherwise, things that change all DCs, like Elite and Weak, would change your flat checks. If you wanted to set this to false, you can. So you could create a flat check and then set immutable false, and that would set up a flat check that does change with Elite and Weak. You can also add in the name. You can also forcibly override the traits. This one is pretty uncommon to see, but this is just true false, and this will say that. So normally at check, if I add, the acid trait to something and I roll, right, I can see that acid is included automatically because it picks up all the item traits. But if I add in override traits and then roll, acid is no longer there, right? So this would be for if you had an ability that needed to have a check that had a different set of traits than the owning item, and if you only wanted to exclude certain traits, you would have to come in to the traits list in here and manually spell them all out, the ones that you want, and then override the traits. And that would ditch all of the traits from the origin item. So the next thing in our style guide is Inline Actions, and this is our /act format, right? And so this, right, it's very similar to @check, but instead of using an @ it uses these double square braces. And so this creates buttons that actually pull the proper action macro. So I didn't set up anything at all about how sneak works. I didn't have to add notes or anything. Once I gave it this, it's pulling the actual traits from this thing. It knows that, hey, this is a move action, this is a secret action, and it has the critical failure outcome automatically, right? So, right, if I run it again, right, failure, now I get, the failure text. So this is how you can use these inline actions. These have a few different options, right? So I can change out the statistic that's used. So, for example, in versatile performance, you can use performance to do a certain set of actions. This is how you would do that. Is you can say, hey, make an impression, but use performance instead of diplomacy. You can also apply variants. So administer first aid has a couple of variants, and some actions like administer first aid, you have to tell it what variant you're using. So in this case, right, variant stop bleeding. And so this will use the stop bleeding variant of administer first aid. Okay. So the next thing is inline templates. So this creates templates that you can use to create you can use to create sort of placeable templates on the ground, right? So a 15 foot burst. When you click this, you get this draggable burst template, right? And so I don't have to go over to the template layer and draw a burst, right? I can just create these nice things. I can also so if I go like template line distance, this is a 20-foot line, and And with line, I can also specify the width. So this is a 20-foot line that is 10 feet wide. Right, and so now I can, place this. I can use this to create square areas. If you've ever looked at the Foundry data for what their rectangular areas look like, these rectangles aren't defined by an X by X area. They're defined by a ray from the origin to the far corner, which is a very compact way to specify it in a computer, but having to type out, create a ray that is X long and at this angle from the origin is kind of a pain, because that's a compact set of data, but it's also a hassle to actually program. And so while you can create them using some inline magic, it requires you go in and edit the actual HTML. It is much easier to just say, hey, just use the width. This is the same thing as saying a 20 by 10 square or 20 by 10 rectangle. Right, and so that's that's how inline stuff works. You can see how the HTML formatting works here. We do not use this in the system. If you try to submit a PR with this, I'm gonna have words with you pretty quickly. So please do not use this in the actual system. Use this only if you really, really want an inline template to have a specific fill color, or you need some other data set in there for a module or whatever. We don't support this in the system anymore. The rest of the style guide goes over how we format things, and so I would suggest giving this a read through. This all just covers, how do we handle different abilities? How do we do things like item activations? Where do you put horizontal lines? And so you can see here the difference between, Skyhammer, where we have the item activation, then we put horizontal line underneath the top block of the activation, and between that and the effect, and then also have another one above the craft requirements. Or if you had, let's say, outcomes, we would have those below a horizontal line. But for items that have multiple activations, it's hard to separate them just with a horizontal line. So instead, what we do is we put each activation just fully in its own block. And so we skip the normal line that would be between frequency and effect, so that it's easier for users to look and see, like, oh, this is one thing, this is another thing, this is another thing, right? So it's just faster for users to look when there's a complicated item, so they can see all of the activations all at once. All of the action symbols, this is something that comes up quite a bit in Discord, is people will find this option here in this, but it doesn't do anything. And the reason it doesn't do anything is because they need to type in 1, 2, 3, F, or R. Right, and so if we go into the HTML, we can see that this is adding a new span to format these things, and then I just have 1, 2, 3, FR, and in this action glyph font that we're telling it to use in the action glyph CSS, it's swapping out the font for 1, 2, 3, F, and R to these. And so these are just different characters. So if I wanted to, right, I could pre-type out my actions, come in here, go to PF2e, select this, and I get the same thing, right? Because I'm now just applying that span, that CSS to this block that I already had. So that's how these action symbols work. We don't have action symbols for 1 to 2, 1 to 3, 2 to 3 actions, right? We don't have that. We would just have to separate them, something like that, 1 or 2 sort of thing. So yeah, we don't have anything for that just yet. The other thing we use is we follow Paizo's style. right? So that means that spell names and magic item names are italicized or emphasized. If you create a link to a spell item, it will automatically italicize for you. With conditions, we create a link to the first instance of that condition and that level, right? So we link to Frightened 1 and Frightened 2 and Frightened 3 as 3 different things, because people can just drag those boxes onto the actor. But if it repeats Frightened 1 or 2 or 3, we don't do that, right? We don't create a second link, because having too many of these boxes makes the thing look a little cluttered. So we make these links typically by using the data entry app, which I've already shown. It will automatically pick up on most of them. But we can also just insert the links, right? And so I want to show you something here. This is the quick insert module. It's great. I highly recommend it if you are doing data entry. If you search for Frightened, you can... Oh, well, that's real ugly. So we turn that off, right? So we can insert Frightened, but I also want to show that if I just drag in Frightened from Compendium, I get a slightly different link. And if you look closely, you'll notice that the difference is this document level, right? So this is telling us, all right, this is in a compendium, it's one of the PF2e compendiums, it's the condition items compendium, and it's this document. This is the same thing. It's in a compendium, it's in the PF2e compendium, it's in the condition items compendium, and it is this kind of document. And then it's this document. This is an important bit. Okay, this is the new style of linking. Quick insert, when you just pull something up and hit enter, it will not create the document level. So if you are using quick insert, what you have to do to get that document level is just drag the link out. And then you get Foundry creating the link instead of quick insert, and you get the document type added in there. So it's pretty common to see people doing new data entry and missing that they will submit and they will submit things and it's missing the document type. If you do that, then the extraction doesn't know how to look for this. Part of our extract pack processes is that this, when you extract it from Foundry into the just raw JSON files that we use, it will swap out the document ID for the name, so that when we're reviewing the PR, we can actually see what's going on, right? We can tell, like, oh yeah, this is a link to Frightened. So that is, a thing to be aware of. When you are linking to conditions, if you want to link to a different level of the condition, you just add that level into the label, right? So this is now Frightened 4. When I drag it onto an actor, it knows, oh yeah, start that Frightened at badge value 4. And that's true not just for conditions, but also effects. So, if I had an effect that had a badge value on it, I could create that effect at a higher badge value than default by just adding a number in there. So yeah, that's how that works. For Bestiary stuff, I will cover that when we talk about NPCs. If I haven't already, I don't know where I'm putting this bit in the thing. I've had to re-record it a couple times. So in the monster lore, right, I talk about how to, where you put everything inside the monster, where you get this stuff. Some sidebars, when you're doing entry, actually have mechanical rules, and that should go in the monster itself as opposed to hiding it in their description. Alternate versions of the monster, right? Soulbound Dolls, back before the remaster, had a bunch of variants. This is very common among dragons, where you get spellcasting versions of the dragons that are missing some of their abilities, like Draconic Frenzy, but they have spellcasting added on. So yeah, I've covered most of this stuff. This, this stuff all works. If there's a missing DC, use a moderate DC, right? So all of this is, this all stuff that you can come through and read. It just covers in how we actually expect things to look in the system. And for the most part, that rule is how Paizo formats it. The one thing I want to say is if you are going to be doing system entry, this is important, right? Please do use imperative case in your PR titles, right? So if merged, this PR will blank, and then make sure that your PR fills in that blank, capitalize the first letter of the word, capitalize rules, right? So swashbuckler is a class, so capitalize it, right? Fix spell details for talking corpse gets capitalized, and just try to, keep your titles short enough that we can actually tell really quick, because usually we try to turn these just directly into the changelog items. So as long as they are short and descriptive of what you did, people can immediately see, oh, great, I see what this did. If it's something super vague, then we have to the person who's putting together the changelog would have to actually go and look at the PR, and we don't want to have to make them, go back through and do extra work when they're trying to put together a changelog that might have 200 merges included in it, right? So we're just making life a lot easier for the people, whoever's doing the actual release that time. So there's one more thing that I want to talk about in the style guide before I finish that is not yet included in this, and I will add it before we actually upload this video, and that is @embed. So let's say I have an ability, so I need to reference slam down, right? I can just link to it, just drag it in and get the link to that. But what if I actually wanted to have the text of slam down in my item? Okay. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my @UUID to @embed. And then here at the end, I'm going to add space inline. And now this test item has the full text of slam down along with its prerequisites just included as is, right? And so if I make a change to slam down, it automatically updates here. And this isn't terribly useful inside items themselves, but it's incredibly useful inside journals. So inside these journals, we've got all of the descriptions of the archetype feats, right? And we haven't yet gone through and added @embed to all of the archetype journals yet, but after the release of Divine Mysteries, we likely will, where we will, if we look at some of these should be done with @embed now. Oh, no, still not done with that. Oh, there they are. Yeah, so we have these done with @embed, which makes them much shorter. And if there's changes, if we got the text wrong, we don't have to come and change it in 2 different places, right? So any change to the text will automatically update the journals. That's really nice if you are releasing a module that has links to things. If you've used the Battle Zoo Year of Legends module or the Classic Creatures module, right? Those have links and descriptions of feats and heritages, and since @embed has been added, we've started moving our descriptions to using @embed in those journals, which has made formatting those journals significantly easier and much nicer if I have to make changes during the process, because I don't have to make it in 2 places. So how do you actually, go about adding the description quickly, right? So this is the section where people might, wonder, like, how do we actually go fast, right? Because we go pretty fast in data entry here. So how do we actually do that? So I'm going to show you by entering in the slam down feat here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste the name, and I'm going to copy and paste the name so that I do not spell it wrong, so that I don't fat finger it. And when I paste the name in, it is screaming at me, right? Slam down, all caps. So what I need to do instead is I need to title case it. And I have a script to do that so that I don't have to retype every single feat name. I will be showing off those scripts at the end of the video, so if you're interested in those, I will post them somewhere, and you can get all the auto hotkey scripts that I use. So that lets us now quickly create the item. Okay, so we're going to select the book icon, and this is a class feat. And the next thing I need these traits. All right, fighter and flourish. So I'm going to copy the traits, and when I go to paste them in, nothing happens, because those traits, if you notice, are not comma separated. So I have another script that massages copy traits into the proper format to just be pasted in. So that lets us quickly paste in large trait lists, which is nice, and then you just want to make sure that you count afterward, right? I have 2 traits here, 2 traits here, done. Okay, prerequisites. Prerequisites is part of the details tab. So I just paste that in there, double check. If the prerequisites break onto different lines, right? Won't even let me do that anymore. We just changed this this field out for a new tech behind the scenes. But if these are split into different lines, you can just double click on them and fix them. So if the formatting is wrong, you just come in here and fix it up. So that now gives us our prerequisites over here. And then now for the description, right? If I come over here and I copy and I paste in, that looks terrible, right? That like the line breaks are weird, the text formatting is strange. And if I come into the HTML mode, I see I've got a whole bunch of just I've got all these line breaks in here that I don't need. So what I'm going to do is I am going to paste that into our data entry tool, reformat our text, and then in HTML entry mode, I'm going to paste in the output of my field here, and it automatically formats it, and it picked up on the fact that there is a trip reference in this text. So let's talk a little bit about this data entry tool here, because this is going to be the main thing that we sort of we rely on to actually fix up descriptions automatically. So the first thing to know about the data entry tool, right? So if I paste in this, and this, by the way, if you are on Windows, there is an option to enable clipboard history by using Windows V. And you can create a list of your clipboard, which is really nice to have when you're doing data entry, because sometimes you will need to bounce back and forth between pasting 2 different things. So yes, that is a very good tip for this. But right, this thing has all these line breaks in it, and it also has some symbols here. So this if I copy and paste this up here, notice that this apostrophe is different than the one that you type when you're just typing on your keyboard. That's because this is a right-sided quote, an RS quo character. Right, and so slam down, not knock down. This is why I don't type things, right? So we don't get the wrong name on items. So one of the things the script does is it removes all of those, right? So this RS quo here just gets removed. It gets replaced with a normal apostrophe, because it is difficult to search in text when the computer is expecting. If the computer expects you to be searching for an RS quo character there, right? JavaScript is pretty strict about being literal with the characters you use. So we want to standardize them to what people actually have on their keyboard for the most part. There's a few non-standard symbols that we do keep, but especially in titles, right? If there's an artist quote in a title, you do want to make sure that you remove that and replace it with a normal apostrophe, which my script does not do. I should make it do that, I guess, but I have other things that I use that title case script for that I don't want to. I would rather just fix them instead of forcing myself to go insert artist quotes into certain things. So yeah, so that is, sort of this script. It replaces these. It looks for things like this trip here, and it treats that like, oh, it sees that you're making a check to trip something, make a link to trip. It does a lot more. So this is a Python script that I have been writing over several years now. That this script will first off, right, it does all the formatting it possibly can. It tries to find certain items to bold or create links to if it's possible. And it also just cleans up a lot of sort of weird formatting, right? So it's a good start. Some items, when you do them, aren't going to look right. So, right, if instead of slam down, if I am working on dual-handed assault, right? So I come in here to dual-handed assault. I'm going to copy both parts of it. Paste in the first part, paste in the second part. Another great thing about the multi-clipboard, right? If I hit reformat text, and I paste it, right, I get my requirements, but you might notice that the requirements don't end up on their own line, right? And that's because the script has no way of knowing that this line break here is supposed to be the end of the requirements block. It just doesn't. Because what about this line break here? Right? There's just no way that it would know there's no good way to know when this thing ends and when this thing does, or when this thing starts. So instead, what I have is another script that I can just hit a button and paste in a paragraph end line, or end call, a horizontal line, and then start a paragraph. And now when I reformat, I now get that properly. So some of these things require that you just, know some of the little hiccups the tool will have, because it's just a script, right? It's not magic. It just does what it can to try and make life easier, which for the most part is, quite a bit normally. So that's one of the things you have to be careful of is, this sort of strange formatting. If you have something that has a line break in the middle, right? I have a script that just inserts a regular old paragraph break, or you just type in a paragraph break, or you just copy paste, and then afterward you come in and you insert the paragraph break where it belongs, right? We try to match Paizo's formatting as much as possible when we copy something. So, right, for sleek reposition, we would be copying all of this, right? And this, right, this correctly picks up on the failure condition here, because that's a thing that I can key on, but there's no way I could pick up on the fact that this is actually supposed to be a new paragraph here, right? So we need to insert that new paragraph. We need to insert the paragraph at the end of polearm, and then put a line between the sections here, right? So this formats it properly after a little bit of coercion, or we can come in here and just insert our two different things, and we get the same exact result. Just looking like that, right? So that's the basics of the data entry tool and item entry, right? This script is available as a standalone exe file, or if you don't want to download random executable files from the internet, it is the full source code is available online. It's just a PyInstaller is the system I use to set up the actual to create the actual exe from this, and feel free to reach out if you want to build it yourself, as opposed to just download the exe. So yeah, this has a bunch of settings in here, right? If you're doing something for Starfinder, you would click this. If you are doing journal text, you might not want to create inline roles or create add action links or condition links. You might also want to not remove some of the non-standard characters. And you can also set it up so that there's no wrapping paragraph tags. These things are mostly for my use. I doubt too many people are handling Eldamon powers, but that is, I've built in handling specifically for many of the different things that I work on other than the PF2e system. I also do have a version of this tool for the 5e system. That one is much more bare bones, but it does some things like creating tables pretty quickly. Just different tools for different systems because different systems format their rules slightly differently. So that's how this works. We will always keep this thing up to date, right? The current version is 2.29, and you can go and download the latest version. If I make major updates to it, I will usually ping our entire data entry team. If you're not on our data entry team, we typically accept people onto the data entry team after a history of pretty consistent data contributions, right? It's not just I made a few in a week. Typically, we would require you to spend a few months, a month or so, making not like daily, but weekly contributions to the system that are more substantial. So we give you access to some of our dev channels. So yeah, that is our data entry tool. That's how we do item entry. For NPC entry, right? That's the other big thing that we do. So if we look back at Monster Core, here to Iron Hag, right? Same thing. I can paste in the name, right? Use my title case script to actually create the creature's name without screaming at myself, right? This is a level 6 creature. And right, typically what I do is I just start from the very top of the list and I just go down, right? So I've got my traits in, I've got my size in, there's no listed rarity, so it's just uncommon, or so it's common. And then I'm going to use a macro that I have. I'm going to copy and paste the entire interaction and defensive section. And move my chat log over here so you can see what it outputs. I've got this entry macro, and when I run this, it is going to read this text and try to parse out as much as it can from the text. Okay, so that isn't everything, and it does make some mistakes. So the first thing to notice is it said parenthetical in athletics. So that's telling me that there's something in athletics that it couldn't handle, and that is this parenthetical here, plus 16 to grapple. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit the skills, come in here to athletics and add special, and then I'm going to paste in the 2 grapple. This is a predicate just like with rule elements, so this needs to apply to action grapple, and the modifier on grappling is 16. So now I've handled that. So it tells it, hey, create this new label here. If I click this, I will get my regular modifier plus to grapple, and I get my plus 16 modifier out of it in total. Okay, so that is, you can now do this. It used to be that you had to make rule elements to actually add these bonuses. You no longer do. So that's much nicer now. It also means we don't need to localize these labels since they're no longer in an array and unreachable to most of the localization modules. The second thing that we have to deal with is that it just dumps the entire special senses to the special senses field, right? And that's normally not an issue for something like, for something like True Sight or whatever. But we want to get rid of dark vision, low light vision, anything that's actually in the senses menu. We want to actually set the sense on the creature and then delete it from the special senses. That way we don't have any special senses that are not handled in the system, right? So this is very much a developer tool, right? It's something that I'm willing to accept a little bit of jank on, and I haven't sat down to work out how to get this thing to actually just directly add dark vision if it detects it in special senses, and so on and so on. It sets the armor class and the HP, but you do want to be careful because sometimes, because it's just a script using regular expressions, sometimes the script will fail, and because the script will fail, these will get set to 10, and you just have to come in here and actually set them up yourself. Right, so you might notice it didn't grab absolutely everything, because it didn't figure out that Iron Hags have a resistance 3 to physical. Right, so we have to add resistances ourselves, because I just haven't gotten around to doing that for the macro yet. Right, and the exception is adamantine. Right, so we can set up a resistance just like that. Same thing if there was a immunity or weakness, none of that is going to be automated. Then we have this +1 status to all saves versus magic. This note was not added in for us, right? So we have to add it in ourselves. And then we also want to automate it. And so we could make a passive, and we could call it +1 status to all saves versus magic, right? So we could call it this. Remember that this ability is here in the defensive block, and so it should get a defensive category, right? And then we could add in a flat modifier rule element. But if I just bring up quick insert and type in +1, I see +1 status to all saves versus magic. We have this in the system as a convenience effect in the Bestiary ability glossary, just right here. So a lot of creature abilities that are glossary abilities or very common abilities we will have in this compendium. If you are making a creature from a family, like a beheaded or a ghost, we have all the cryptid abilities in here, right? So anything that Paizo creates these families of creatures, and then they have a large list of abilities that belong to that family, we put those in this creature family ability glossary. And so all you need to do is just drag them in, and they get this, and then you just need to come in here and delete out the label, and then you can come in and set the actual DC, right? So DC 45, and you can delete that text to make it just nicer, right? Because once you set the actual DC, you don't really care about, you shouldn't need to care about, what the spell DC is, or telling the GM, this is based on the spell DC or whatnot, right? So that's how, that script works. For the other things, right? If I was going to enter in an ability, it's the same sort of thing, right? I would copy the name, create a new action, edit it. This is an offensive action, right? I can copy and paste those. And one of the nice things about copy pasting from a PDF is that if you're doing this for your own work, you will catch every single mistake you ever make. Because if you, say, for example, had the concentration trait on your item, and you go to paste it in, you'll notice that it does not enter, because concentration is not a trait. Concentrate is, right? And so you will catch that kind of mistake, these tiny little things that are very easy to make when you are, writing a thing and you've got 20 years of TTRPG experience inside your head, and you're just, who cares about the difference between concentrate and concentration? Well, as it turns out, computers do. So they will catch every one of those mistakes for you, right? And we can copy paste this. One of the nice things about creature abilities is that they tend to have effect starting the block. And so effect is something I can pick up on in the script. So this was automatically caught, right? It knows where frequency end and effect begins because effect is called out. And so I can then, add a frequency. So this is once per day, right? And this is a 2 action ability. And so that gives us, that's the whole thing we need, right? This is, it's got the links in it. We can come in and we can create automation for this with rule elements, but, again, that's a different video. And so that's how we would set up these kinds of abilities. If I've got an attack, right, I just create an attack, create a new attack. If you'll notice that it says melee on here, if you want to create a ranged attack, all you need to do is actually give it a range, right? If I give it a range increment of 100 feet, it now becomes a ranged attack, right? So either give it a range increment, or thrown. Any of those will give it, will make it a ranged attack. If you have a creature that has a weapon, like a real weapon, you just add the weapon to their inventory, generate the attack, and then they have this attack that gets set up with all of the traits of the weapon. It has a modifier and damage pulled from the creature building tables, and you can come in here and make them what you want, right? Because these are pulled from moderate values, and you might want a low value, or you might want an extreme value if it's supposed to be a big bruiser of a creature, right? You can also add in additional attack effects. So, for example, here in the additional attack effects, right, we've got a lot of different things, but one of the more common ones that you see is grab, right? So, if you drag on there, right? Okay. So now when I, hit additional attack effects, I can set grab, and then longsword plus grab, right? It's very strange longsword lets you grab with it, but. So that is how, how we set up creatures, sort of the basics of most of the moving parts. With spells, if you drag in a ritual, it will automatically get added to this ritual section. Otherwise, you just create a spellcasting entry. With notes, you can set up a description, right? You can also set up private notes, right? So these are notes that only the GM would see, whereas if players had observer access, they could see these, right? And the same thing with the publication here. You can get the license and publication data on actors. So let's say, so that's creatures and that's items. Journals are very similar things. So let's go into some of the actual tools that I use. So the first tool that I'm going to show off here is going to be the stuff here on my macro bar. And we're just going to, we're going to do these two, and then we're going to do these two, and then we're going to finalize our data entry and show you off that macro. So this first macro is, I just call it summon the horde, right? So this makes copies of a creature, right? And so this is nice. If I have multiple creatures that I need to make copies of, I can either right-click and duplicate, which, all right, fine, but then I have to come in here and fix the, copy at the end of the name. But if I have a bunch of creatures I want to make, and I want to do it with just one fell swoop, I can just come in here and say, hey, make 4 new copies of Iron Hag. And it does. And if that Iron Hag was in a folder, then it would have created those copies inside the folder. Same exact thing with this next macro, except that it's for items. Right? And so it just creates 5 new copies of Slamdown because I told it, hey, Slamdown, make 5 new copies. That is mostly useful, I find, for creating new feats when you are setting up something that has a lot of feats. So, for example, I will make a new feat, and I will just name the feat 1, right? So this is something that I do when I create new ancestry feats for new ancestries, right? So I will come in here, I will get the whole thing set up the way that I want it to be, right? So it's this, and I know that, this is a new feat for, let's say, Elf, right? Paizo releases a new book and it has, 30 new Elf feats in it, right? Or you've got your homebrew book that's got just a whole bunch of, feats for a brand new ancestry. So you're just going to come in here, you're going to set it up. All these feats have the Elf trait. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look down the list of feats, I'm going to come in and I'm going to say, oh, well, first level feats, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 first level feats, right? And so this is already a first level feat, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to run this. I'm going to say item name 1, I want 8 copies. And then how many 5th level feats, just change that name to 5, change the feat level to 5, come in here and say, oh, well, I've got 4 or 3, 4 5th level feats. Got that. So now I have 4 5th level feats plus the one that I'm just carrying along and modifying. Change that to 9, change that to 9, and so on, right? That way I then have a list of all of the feats that I need, separated out by their level, so I don't have to worry about getting the level wrong on the feats. And if I do run out of first level feats and I'm still have extras to enter, then I know I probably missed one, right? So I can, it helps add an extra layer of just double checking, right? And so I will link to these two macros. They are on the same GitLab page as these two macros. So the next macro to take a look at, right? So that is sort of a window into my madness when I am creating feats. So the next window into my madness here is spell entry. And so for spell entry, right, we don't have a spell list here on Iron Hag, but we've got one on Cuckoo Hag. Cuckoo? Whatever. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that entire list, starting with occult innate spells and ending with the last spell. All right, so I'm going to make an occult innate entry. I'm going to come over to my spell macro, paste in the entire list, and what I get out is a nice orderly list of all of the spells. And if it can't find one, it will note that it cannot find that spell. So then I can just start dragging them in. All right, and I can drag them in, right? I've got one at 9th rank, these at 5th rank, and you just want to double check, because one of the things this doesn't do is if some of these are at will or continuous, then it doesn't tell you that, right? Because this needs to strip out all that stuff so that it can try and find the right spells, right? So this is just a good way to start your spell list. And you still want to make sure you're dragging things to the right fields, right? But this is a much faster way. If you've ever done NPC entry, this is a much faster way to enter things than to try and put them all in by hand. Right, and so now I can look and see, Acid Grip, I'm supposed to have 3 uses of it. Seize Soul is at will, Seize Soul Covenant, right? And so I would just need to come in here and start making those notes, right? So like Acid Grip, that has 3 uses, right? Seize Soul, at will, Seize Soul, blah, blah, blah. Right. So yeah, that's, and for that kind of thing, for these longer ones, I would probably just copy paste and replace the semicolon with a comma, just to keep things a little bit cleaner in the titles. So yeah, so this is how, we would do the spell entry for these creatures. And so you can see, like, if I had to just, especially if I only had one monitor, if I had to bounce back and forth between the PDF and be like, okay, Seize Soul, spell seize correctly, right? Come in here and, grab that on there, right? That would be a huge pain. That would take forever. I don't have that much time. So instead, I use that macro. Then this macro I already showed off, sort of what it does. You can see, it's a complex beast if you look at the thing. But I use all of those macros, and then this final one. So if we come in here to this, right, I can enter in the book that I'm working on, and then this book is Orc, and it's remaster. Right, and when I hit finalize data entry, what this does is it goes through every single NPC and every single item in the game world, and for NPCs and hazards, it will set their HP to full, because when I used this script, it just upped the max HP. It didn't touch the current. It will set the publication data on all of the items to what you have set in the script here, right? So it just sets that to this, and it sets license to Orc, sets the remaster to whatever you have here. If the license is Orc, it will force remaster true, right? And then the other thing that it does is, so let's say I come in here and I set this paralyzing touch to undefined as the category. Oh, well, that broke. It should warn me that my category is unset on the creature. I will fix that before we before I upload this video. So the version online will definitely work. But yes, it should tell you in console that this thing has an undefined category, and that's important because the system will complain at you if you try to extract a creature with an undefined category, with an action with an undefined category. So that is the basic data entry macros that I use, right? So these 5 macros. The 4 of them are on a GitLab page. I will add skill entry onto that GitLab page if I haven't already. Then the next set of tools that I use, right? So I talked about auto hotkey, but before I do that, I want to just talk a little bit about just scripting in Foundry in general. It is very, very useful to learn at least a little bit of JavaScript, at least how to do a loop over things, because let's say I'm coming in, I create a brand new world to do data entry in, right? I'm creating a new module and I want to create a new world, or I'm doing system data entry, I create a new world to just start fresh. I come in here, I don't want to have to come through and unlock every single compendium. I would lose my mind. So what I'm going to do is I've got this very nice, very compact script here. I'm going to come into console. I didn't actually copy it. I'm going to paste in my script. I'm going to run it. It's going to take just a second. But you're going to see, once this thing finishes, all those lock icons are going to vanish. Okay, so now all of these compendiums are unlocked. So now when I come in here and I open something up, I can actually edit it directly in Compendium. That's nice, right? Because if I edit something directly in Compendium, then I can immediately just extract it. I don't have to worry about accidentally overwriting the ID. So that's good for data entry. If you are working on your home game, don't edit anything in system compendiums, because those will get replaced by the next system update anyways. Right, and so that's the, it's very nice to have, scripts like this that can do tedious tasks for you quickly. Right, so I've got this script. I've got another script here, right? So this is one I don't need to actually show it off, but I can show you sort of how you can do some of these things. So when you extract items from a compendium in the system, what happens is that the system will automatically create a slug for them. But that doesn't necessarily work when you extract from a module, if you even have an extract set up. Most modules won't. So most modules won't even have an extraction system. You'll just ship the database files as is. And when you look at any item, if I make an item here and I come over to the rules tab, the slug is blank, right? But that slug can be important because if somebody else comes along and changes the name of the item because they are either a localization or because they decide that, hey, I want to, call this something different, their slug would change when they end up actually using it. And so if you're relying on that slug to be consistent, like you have a rule element that references item slug X, you want this slug to always be set, right? And so that's what this script does, is it just says, hey, this is something that I did in Starfinder because the extraction doesn't create the slugs on the items like it does for the system. So I just said, hey, anything that includes Starfinder in the metadata for the pack, just go through those packs, and as long as it's not a journal entry, roll table, actor, or adventure, set the slug. Just run a process called Slugify. That's a system method that lets us actually turn a name into the kebab case slug, and then set the slug, right? And so this kind of thing, right? This kind of script saves hours of very tedious work, and it doesn't take too long to actually learn how to do. And this is still kind of hacky, right? Because I'm just looping over things. I'm not batching all the changes, right? I'm actually getting the documents from the pack as opposed to just going over the index. So there's a lot of things that, you can do without having to get into a lot of the sort of, nitty-gritty of actual programming. And so the last thing that I'm going to talk about is the actual AutoHotkey scripts. AutoHotkey is a program for computers that lets you just create little scripts or little macros for your computer. So here, let's go over each of these things that I use. So this is Control E. So what this is saying is when AutoHotkey is running this script, if I hit Control E, send a end paragraph and begin paragraph line out. And so this is for adding line breaks. When I'm using this data entry tool, that's what I do. I just hit Control E and it inserts the line break for me. Very similarly, the next one, Control R, that inserts the end paragraph and then a horizontal rule and then the new paragraph. And so that just enters in that for me, right? Very, very similar scripts, almost identical. And that's just a really nice time save. The next one, Control T, this is my title case script. So what this does is it runs a function called string upper, which just uppercases every word in the script, in the input, and the input is my clipboard, and then I output my clipboard. And so this is saying, all right, go ahead and take whatever's on the clipboard, put it into regular title case, which is just every single word gets capitalized, and then send whatever's on the clipboard, right? So just send Control V. So that's what this does. Control H, I have the same thing, but I wrap it in header tags. So this is for journal entry. That is probably this next one is Control Shift H, and this is header 3 tags instead of header 2 tags. These are almost certainly things that these are very specific to me, but it gives you an idea of the kinds of things you can automate. If you're doing something over and over and over, you can just write this kind of thing. Control L, this is what takes this list here. So if I copy this and I paste it, I get that. If I Control L, I get that, right? So I just comma separate my list. And this is what lets it work in the traits field, because the traits field doesn't accept the spaces. I have to comma separate the list. Then Control D or Control Shift D. this will send out an inline check for us. And so these inline checks, right, so this automatically creates one that's reflex against class spell. That's just a common one, so I can come into an item, Control-Shift-D, send that in. If it's actually supposed to be a will save, I just change that to will. If it's supposed to be basic, I just add basic, pipe, and then basic. Right, and so that just gives me a quick way to anything that the data entry script misses, because the data entry script will try to find these, but sometimes the wording on things gets a little strange, and, you know, as stated before, like, it's just regular expressions. It's not magic, right? It doesn't actually know what it's doing. It's just looking for certain words and replacing text. So that's what this one does, right? Just Control-Shift-D, it gives me this very commonly used thing. And then this Control-Shift-A, this is purely a me thing, but same idea, that I have this thing I do very commonly for the Battle Zoo modules, where I have to create, if you've used any of the Battle Zoo modules, they have these call-out text boxes, and the CSS we use requires them to be in a compartment class. And so that's what this is doing, is it's creating a new section for me that I can then work on directly. And so those are some of the tools we use for data entry. That is, you know, sort of a window into the sort of madness that, you know, I get into. In the next video, you will see a lot more. I do want to, you know, show off some of the more some of the quicker ways that I do data entry, but before I do that, I need to, you know, find an appropriate book to do it from that will be instructive without being, like overly difficult to actually be demonstrative. So yeah, that is you know, sort of the basics of data entry in Foundry for Pathfinder 2e. And even if you're doing data entry for other systems, all of this stuff applies, right? The actual macros and the script that I use, that might not help you, but all the methods should. And you can, you know, this script, you can take it and modify it for your own uses. You know, like I said, I've got a 5e script that is based off of this that I use for Battle Zoo 5e entry. And yeah, so, you know, it's very helpful to have tools that help speed things up for you. And so I know that, you know, there's a lot more to talk about with data entry. So yeah, that's it. Please remember to go to Extra Life and, you know, make some donations. Help me have to make more of these videos. I've got videos on the ephemeral effect rule element lined up if people will donate enough, and I'm sure everybody will like to learn more about how ephemeral effect works. The special resource rule element, once that is added and available, I will add that to the system, or add that to the video if I reach that milestone. So yeah, other than that, everybody have a, you know, great day. Bye.